It's time for another episode of the Make Space Boring News Show. We're back with Raphael Roettgen, and he is the founder of E2MC, a space venture capital firm. Thanks for being here. And we're going to talk about March 2021's funding rounds for the space industry, the public things that we can see anyway. We know there were private things done. So, Raphael, there was a lot of money put into SPACs this time, and a launch company I wanted to discuss with you real quick. What's your take on it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we're already talking about SPACs in our last episode, right? When we were reviewing the February funding rounds. And then in February, we had things like Astra and Black Sky. And I'm pretty sure I hopefully said something along the lines, Jason, I expect this to continue. And of course it has continued. And you know, I'm going to sit here again and I'm going to say, Jason, I expect this to continue. It might slow down for various reasons for a little bit, but in general, I expect it to continue. I mean, the whole SPAC thing is continuing. In general, we had the largest SPAC deal ever announced today for an Asian company, Grab, in the food delivery business. But in the space sector, yeah, in March, as most people know, we had actually on the first day of March, we had two announcements on the same day, right? Rocket Lab and Spire, so launch and remote sensing for a combined almost $1.3 billion. I mean, Rocket Lab being the bigger one, which makes sense. It's a more mature company. It has revenue. You know, it has a lot of customers. It's very well regarded. And then towards the end of the month, we had Wetwire, which you know is also something I would have expected to happen. I mean, this is effectively a roll-up of smaller, previously private space companies. A roll-up that was executed by a aerospace-focused private equity fund out of Florida. And of course, they want to have an exit, and you know the favorable SPAC market, you know, has provided them with an opportunity for a relatively early exit.
All right, yeah, and I guess on one hand, it's great to see dedicated funds going into the space industry. On the other hand, these valuations are pretty high. I know I'm not going to get you to comment on that, but I guess, you know, hey, the money's there. They will need it because these are capital intensive, you know, organizations. What about ABL Space Systems? They got $170 million. So it's a decent chunk of change. Does the market need another space launch company? You know, it's at what point do we go, okay, there's enough in the mix here?
Well, the market will decide that at the end. You know, I'm suspecting, I'm not privy to, you know, any detailed information on ABL, but I'm suspecting if, you know, smart people like Fidelity and T. Rowe Price wrote checks, and you know, there's other people in the round, that they, you know, are feeling comfortable about the customer pipeline of ABL. I think ABL is a very interesting company. I mean, they have a very, you know, what I would call a very agile launch system where you can really sort of put up these rockets to launch very, very quickly in, you know, many locations. So I think it's an interesting company. Yeah, I mean, you know, I know what you're alluding to, and I certainly don't think the world needs the whatever close to 200 launch companies that exist on paper right now. Most of those, of course, are solely on paper. I do think there's a number of, you know, more advanced players who each in their own right have some interesting aspects.
Okay. Is there anybody on this list that we haven't mentioned that you look at and go, oh, people should pay attention to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things. I mean, for different reasons. So I think the Hyper round in the Netherlands is interesting. So let's leave aside the IoT business model. That's actually not why I think it's that interesting. There's a number of IoT companies, but just the money, the round was done by an EU entity called the European Innovation Council, and it's just good and interesting to see that there's sort of continued support out of EU entities for space startups. Doesn't surprise me. There's now more and more voices in the EU to sort of strategically support the local space startups, but it's good to actually see a tangible example of that. I think, you know, just to pick one other one, Pixel. So it's an Earth observation company out of India. That's interesting. I mean, it's because it's out of the Indian startup space ecosystem, which I think is a very interesting place at the moment for a variety of reasons. And it's also sort of an interesting subsegment of Earth observation because those guys are basically doing hyperspectral imaging. And, you know, we've seen tons of optical companies, we've seen tons of synthetic aperture radar companies, but hyperspectral hasn't been so busy, and it's interesting and good to see a player there.
Okay, great. And yeah, and I see robotics, spacecraft components, company out of Japan, and some other different ideas in the list. So that's very cool. Well, I appreciate you doing this, Raphael. How's the translation of your book into English going? I'm going to keep pushing on that
Well,
until it
yeah,
happens.
no, we have actually not started on a translation into English. We're working on one into French.
Okay.
There's no sort of date yet.
All right.
But
I
if you
might be able to read that one. Being a Canadian for the first 34 years of my life, I got quite a bit more than that. I did study German on my own, but only for a few years, and didn't get quite into the subject object grammar level, understanding of it. So anyway, so folks can go check out your website, e2mc.space, I believe, and have a look there. And we'll catch up next month. These months seem to go by really fast, and we're talking again. So it's always great to catch
it's an
up, though.
effect of the lockdown, but yes, we'll certainly be talking again very relatively soon about the April funding rounds, and we shall see whether there's going to be, for example, more SPACs. We have not had any announcements so far, but we shall see.
Right.
So the month is not even half over.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason. Pleasure to talk.